Right. And what else do we have? We have the product, product category, subcategory, and product name, which is basically a part of the product entities that we are guessing. We are not sure, right? We are guessing now. How will we be sure about it? We will be sure about it when we verify the relationships. Thank you. Sorry guys, very sorry about it. I had an Amazon guy banging my door like anything. So yeah. So we have these are. These are some of the dimensions that we are guessing that these are part of the sales data sheet and they are together. But we will verify relationships and then we have the measurements like sales, quantity, discount and profit. Right. So let's check the relationship within entities. So within entities, when we want to check, we have again going back over to this. Whereby we have the order date, ship mode and ship mode. These are the order ID, order date, and ship mode. Right. So what we will do is, first we will check that if ship mode is, there is only one ship mode per order. ID because that should be the way, right? There can be only one shipping mode for one order. IDU order 1. IDU order. One place, one order. There can be multiple options while choosing the ship mode, but when it gets chosen, it is only one ship mode. Right. So we need to verify that if ship mode is an attribute of the order ID column, and then what we do is a pivot and we see that. You know, once coming in 0 is something, just ignore the 0, because that 0 is nothing but the blanks that got selected while selecting. So just ignore it. What we see is only one value per order ID. So ship mode can be an attribute of the order ID. Next vendor, ID and vendor name. So it's pretty easy, because it's only this much of data that we see. We see that per vendor ID there is only one vendor name. So when the name is, of course, an attribute of the column vendor, ID. Coming to product ID and product name. So we see that product ID and product name has a one-to-one relationship again. So we can say that product name and vendor name can be the entity names for their respective entity keys. So next, coming to product ID category and subcategory. Remember we had the product ID. Right. These 4 columns where the product tab is popping up. So product ID, category, subcategory, and product name. Now, let's verify product ID and product name as 0, 0, and 1. Now let's verify if category and subcategory qualifies to be attributes of product ID or not. So when we do a Do a pivot table. What we see is, yes, there is only one value per product. ID for one category. One value for category and subcategory per product. ID. So category and subcategory can be an attribute of the product. Next. So there comes my end to the end to checking all the columns that were pertaining to the certain IDs in the data. Right. So we now know that what are my entity keys and what are my attributes for those keys. Now, when we have that, what we will do is we will check the relationships across entities. But while we go for across entities, and why do we do that, all those things, we are clear, right, what we are aiming towards and what we are trying to do in here. Yes. We know, we are good. Yeah. Okay. So I'm counting on that. We are good till now. So now what we know, that we have verified, that you know. You know that. We now know that what all columns are the attributes for the specific entities. Now we need to check. Now it's a sales data, so order ID. I'm, like you know, counting on order ID to be the main entity, because that's where it starts. Right. That's an order ID should have what we had told earlier, that an order and an entity becomes the main entity when it is the most granular part of the data. Correct in any of the e-commerce business. If you consider the sales funnel, it starts with an order. You may have all those awareness consideration. Forget it. Now, when the conversion happens. What is a conversion? What is a checkout? Once you do a checkout, it's basically the order ID or the order being placed in Amazon or in Flipkart or in any of the like. You know the e-commerce websites that you use. The first step is order ID. So order ID is. I'm considering order ID to be the most granular part of the sales data, because once order ID is generated, everything else starts off. Correct. So now we need to verify that. How is order ID related to the entities across? So now what we are doing is we are trying to see the relationship between order ID, customer name and segment. Okay. Customer was. So order ID and customer ID are two different entities in my data. Correct. Now what I am trying to do is I am trying to check with order ID and customer ID that how are order ID and customer ID related and their attributes. Now I know that customer name and segment. We had verified that customer name and segment are some things which are part of the order ID, which are part of the customer ID and their attributes of the customer ID. Right now we will see how order ID and customer ID is related to one another. Now, when I do that, we see that we have only one value. So when we have one value, we can say that the entity customer ID, customer name and segment are attributes of order ID. Right. So then we go ahead and check, like you know, what is the relationship between order ID and vendor ID, and we see that it is a one-to-one relationship between order ID and vendor ID. Why? Because one order can be fulfilled by only one vendor. Correct. However, when we go ahead with vendor ID to order ID, one vendor has lots of order IDs to fulfill. So one vendor ID is one order ID is attributed towards one vendor ID. But one vendor ID can cater to numerous order IDs. Right. So you order a shoe from your e-commerce site. Your shoe order has one order ID, and that is fulfilled by only one vendor that you choose during your purchase. So, if you take an example, like I've seen for the two respective e-commerce sites with their vendors called Cloudtail and WS Retail and Stuffs. So, Cloudtail being a vendor, what it does is it fulfills my order. So one order ID that I place is fulfilled by a vendor called Cloudtail. There are other vendors, but then I choose Cloudtail, and Cloudtail fulfills it. So it's a one-to-one relationship. However, if I check Cloudtail's point of view towards order IDs, as I placed an order, Praveen placed an order. Anil placed an order. So when we all have placed an order and it is being fulfilled by Cloudtail. So, Cloudtail being the vendor ID, it caters to numerous order IDs. So it's a one-to-many relationship. Clear? Yes, sir. Perfect. Now have we seen such kind of a relationship earlier in our ads data set? We did right. So a campaign to media buy had a one-to-many relationship. However, a media buy to campaign had one-to-one relationships. Right. Just try to remember the model when, like you, know how to classify your data. Just try to remember the model when you are classifying any non-digital data set. Even so, if you know the model and if you have verified the relationships, and if you see that what and how I can translate those relationships into the framework that I have as ads data in an ads data set. So it will be very easy for you to map your data. This is a non-digital thing, but if my concept is clear, then I can go ahead and map it to the respective placeholders. And I can work with non-digital data as well.